Hello and welcome to Hops and Bros. This week,
we're taking things a little bit lighter than usual. That's clever. That's clever. I'm proud of this one.
That was pretty clever. I'll give that to you. That was pretty clever.
For an open window on a crappy world, Max and Chris from Ups and Brews. Ups and Brews. Welcome to Ups and Brews.
Alright, so this week we're taking a look at Sessions IPA, or Session beers, I guess, in general.
Session beers in general.
Yeah, because we've done Session IPA in the past, and now it's kind of a deeper look into the term session.
Yeah.
And where it comes from, what it means, and how to achieve a session beer.
Exactly, which was requested by Eco Sessionels, a new brewery out there in Quebec. They actually sent us some beers that I reviewed on Tuesday, so if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. But mostly, we want to dive in a little bit deeper into that subject, and if you have any requests for future subjects, drop them in the comments. Session beers. Where does all that start off? Max, do you have any ideas where it started off a little bit? I'm quizzing you today.
That's kind of funny. I think we had... Didn't we say in the other video that it was for sessions of work? So your boss would allow you X amount of breaks in the day. Those would be called sessions of work. And they would not want you to get shit-faced, so you would have a lower percentage beer. So you would have access to a sessionable beer during that time.
Goddamn, you're good.
I don't know.
You're
It's
good.
just off my memory and kind of piecing things together. Is that it? Is that
Yeah,
close?
if we go a bit more a little bit more precise on it, it's from munition workers back in World War One. They were splitting shifts into sessions from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., which they were able to drink 3 to 4 ABV beer on the job. After that, a 4-hour break to another 4-hour drinking session. So they, of course, don't get the opportunity to get shit-faced and recover from those long hours of work while drinking an amazing little beer to quench their thirst and to probably give them a little bit more courage and a little bit more oomph into the war effort back then in England, which is actually a law that was removed back in 1988. So if you were a worker back in 1980s, listening to nice 80s bands and working at, I don't know, McDonald's in England, you were able to drink on the job from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. and after that 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. but under 4% beers.
That sounds crazy. Really recent to take away that law, but I assume that after World War One, it just kind of left into obscurity, so most people didn't know that it was technically a law. There's this website about Canadian laws that you can look into of all the outdated laws that Canada has and has never removed, just because it's actually more work sometimes to remove a law than just leave it there.
Is this that
it's
website?
Kind of weird, and there's a bunch of random stuff.
Yeah, like there's one, you can't drive your horse drunk in front of the parliament between 3 p.m. and whatever random hour. Something like that.
Yeah. There's some weird, like very oddly specific laws from back when Canada was first starting that I guess made sense then, but now you kind of look at it and go like, but why? Who would do that? It doesn't seem logical, but I guess there was an issue back in the day and they made it a law. So it's kind of funny to think that there's still some of those kicking around.
Exactly. Speaking of kicking around, the whole session movement kind of like slowly died, or probably just stayed with very light, flavorless beers that we now see here in America, or that we saw from a couple of centuries. Just a light, easy drinking beer. But what happened is back in 2009, breweries started, craft breweries were booming, and also the market was asking for lower ABV beers. One beer writer named Lou Bryson was an advocate for session style beers, and he's from Philadelphia, and started an actual blog called the Session Beer Project, which was solely created to promote session beer styles, which is, I guess, a very good mission. Back in 2009, if you think about it, there was a couple of options, but not a lot. We were still at a state where beer was a fight to get the strongest at every single time you're brewing a new beer. Like Imperial this, Imperial that, double this, triple this, quadruple this. I remember having like quad IPAs back then, which was a bit
One of
crazy.
the big reasons I think for the larger percentage beers back in the day was kind of sticking it to the man. So you had those macro breweries creating the 4 or 5% beers for the everyday drinker. Now craft brewers came in and they kind of had to create a new product that was very different than what was already around, and therefore higher ABV beers, stouts, or any kind of unknown style that kind of had gotten forgotten and only kept on surviving because of homebrewers became popular at the time.
Yeah.
So 2009 would be around the date where craft beer really became a hipster thing in North America and really started pushing the limits of what craft beer was. So it's interesting that would happen, and that they would go the complete opposite way, back towards more of a lighter side beer. Now we're seeing a similar kind of change in the beer industry, in the craft beer industry, where now craft lagers are starting to become a thing. Which is kind of weird, because you would not have seen that 20, 30 years ago, because they were brewing styles that were completely different. I mean, pale ales were huge back then, because it was, hey, we've had lagers for so long, let's have a pale ale, let's have British style beers instead of German styles.
Yeah.
Even then, when you look at Brick Brewing in Ontario, which opened, I want to say 30 years ago or something like that, they started with a lager type beer with a Pilsner, which was exactly what the macros were doing, but he did it a little different and was able to kind of gain popularity because of it, because those macro drinkers were able to still palate his beer. So Brick kind of grew from there. I think we're a little off topic.
are they still open, Brick?
I believe so.
Okay.
I think so, but their brands are a little different than what they used to be, and I don't.
Okay.
Like, it's funny. I'm sure I've had a Brick beer in the last little bit, although I can't remember. I really. It's kind of weird. Yeah, you're right. I think
never had
they're
them.
still around, but I can't remember last time I had one. If they are still around, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all this project created by this beer writer out there in Philadelphia led to a couple of little guidelines that were built around the session beer style. So according to this website called a Session Beer Project, a session beer should be 4.5% by volume or less. Flavorful enough to be interesting, balanced enough on multiple point on the beer. So just not just like super malty or something that's very sessionable, drinking easy, and to bring to the third point, which is constructive enough to bring conversation and also reasonably priced. But Max, all this, how can you cram all that in one beer and make it fun every single time when you're homebrewing or just brewing in general?
I think the big thing is session IPAs were the first to really kind of start showing up and being very popular. Why? Because IPAs is mostly hops. It's at least American style IPAs. So it's kind of easy to create a low ABV beer, hit your 4.5, load it with hops, and still get that nice juicy aroma and still be good on the palate. I'd say it'd be a lot harder if you were brewing something like a lager at 3%. You don't have a lot of flavor there, and if you want to do a traditional German lager, there's also a lot of grains that you don't have access to. Or grains and adjuncts that you wouldn't have access to create more of a body. Like a typical session IPA recipe would also be high in oats and high in wheat to create the illusion of body, because by having a lower ABV, you sacrifice a lot of alcohol alcohol does give a lot of presence, creaminess in beer, and body to the beer. So as soon as you cut that, you kind of eliminate a lot of that body. There's ways to fake it if you add more sweetness, or if you add more grains that have more proteins and more of those complex sugars, such as that. And the best way to do it, honestly, is just diluting your wort. You borrow a trick from the macros, and you dilute your wort. You hit your numbers and then add a bunch of water to lower the sugar content to a point where you have more volume. You didn't brew as much of that volume, and then your yeast is going to convert what's there, creating a lower percentage beer. Yeah, I think that'd be the easiest way to do it.
So brewing a smaller batch to end up with a little higher...
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, brew the same batch, just add more water, and then boom, you dilute. There's a lot of dilution that happens in beer, and it gets kind of a bad reputation because the macros do it, because the macros tend to brew high gravity and then dilute their product to create more product and to take away a lot of the body and a lot of different characteristics of those beers. Okay. In the craft beer industry, there are some craft brewers that do brew high gravity, so that's where you have to kind of define what is craft, what is not craft. But anyways, that's a debate for later. And with session beers, and when you don't hit your targets, you are going to dilute, but generally you do it before fermentation, not after.
Yeah. Which is very interesting.
That's what I got, man.
That's pretty neat. And I guess if you're own brewing, it makes it a little bit easier to experiment at the same time, because you can brew one base beer, just one base mash, and then dilute it into two separate fermenters to make different hoppings happening, or different yeast work, or whatever.
I mean, the other thing you could do is just have less grain, like to start off with, because grain is where you're going to have your sugar. So if you have less churro or less base malt, cut it by X amount, you're going to have less fermentable sugar, and then boom, you got yourself a beer that's going to potentially be a lot lower in ABV than it was. So there's a lot of ways to achieve it. I'd urge people to kind of experiment with it. I do think it's a style that's interesting, because it's fun to be able to have a lot of great beer instead of just a very select amount. I mean, an Imperial IPA or an Imperial Stout is kind of good, but you can't have 3 of those in a row without regretting the next day, or at least without being able to drive to the next location. Yeah. A couple sessions can be a good time.
That's how a session works.
Yeah. All right, well, if you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends, and let us know in the comments below what you would like to see next on Craft Beer 101 on Hops and Bros.
That's how it works.